on Good News, Bad News, we didn't have time to talk about Hamilton because, we've been talking about Hamilton forever offline, and everybody's talking about Hamilton, and my kids are singing and dancing Hamilton songs.
Are they wearing crowns and walking elegantly down the stage?
Oh my goodness, my
straight lines.
kids love musicals. One of my children doesn't admit it, but they actually do like it. So anyway, we're going to
know
talk
which one that is.
We're going to talk. I am cursed with having listened to the soundtrack for probably a dozen times in 2 weeks, and that's not bad. I actually am enjoying it. But there is another Hamilton's curse that Norm is going to tell us a little bit about.
Well, I wanted to balance out some of the, I don't think that Hamilton the musical is particularly like a hagiography per se, but I did want to do a complete swing around and read some, let's say, contrary opinion. And so I picked up Thomas DiLorenzo's book, Hamilton's Curse, which is circa roughly about 2006 or 2007 or so. There it is. Yep. And it's a very interesting book. And, I've met DiLorenzo multiple times. I think he's a very interesting fella. I've had multiple beers with him at the Mises Institute, in fact.
And did you have food with those beers?
At the time, probably so.
Okay.
It's been a long time. I first met him back in 2006, in fact, at the Mises Institute. So it's been, I've known him on and off for, the better part of 2 decades.
Nice.
But at any rate, it's a really interesting book, and it would kind of suffice to describe the premise of it. Is that Hamilton's ultimate legacy that he has left for American governance over the past 225 years is really one of centralization of power and mercantilism, and I think that sort of is roughly explained in 2 primary ways. Number one is his legacy of the National Bank, which is the central banking system of the United States is modeled after his deal. I mean, it was his proposition as the first Treasury Secretary of the United States to have a national bank. He was the guy that made that happen, and of course, it did not go so well. and the Jeffersonians fought tooth and nail against it. And despite the fact that in Hamilton the musical tries to kind of, it just sort of takes the line that really comes from part of its source material, which is Ron Chernow's book on Hamilton, that it was a work of economic genius. It's really not that at all. It's very much it's very much just a follow-on to the British banking system, to the Bank of England, which was mercantilist in nature and protectionist in nature. And so, that all of that is a dirty legacy upon Hamilton. The second part I mentioned, and I'm kind of going back again. So again, the national bank and centralization of power, and that is most epitomized, I think, really through his legacy of the court. Strangely enough, a lot of people don't know this. And it's definitely not mentioned in the musical, but John Marshall, one of the early Chief Justices of the United States, was a massive Hamilton, he was idolized Hamilton. He would, in fact, there's some quote of Marshall saying something like that comparably, he is but a candle, a lit candle during the day where the sun of Hamilton is shining, or something like that. It's a bit
wow.
Yeah, but he basically comparing Hamilton is the sun, he is a lit candle. That's it. So, I mean, that's pretty stark, right?
That's pretty bigger than Hamiltonianism. Yeah.
Right. Well, but see, Hamiltonianism is not what Hamilton wrote in the Federalist Papers, incidentally. Whereas the Federalist Papers, ultimately, I mean, and of course, I would say probably being anti-federalist is certainly the better way of considering things. But if federalism, even as proposed in the Federalist Papers, had actually worked, we'd be better off. But it's not what it is. In part because part of what Hamilton tried to do was he basically went all against what he said in the Federalist Papers in order to get the Constitution adopted. He basically set out immediately to subvert that system in the long run. And that's really epitomized in the courts.
Hamilton. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, I mean, I can stop there. That's pretty good.
I would just say Hamilton in the greater pop culture, not just the musical, but there was a scene in the HBO series John Adams where
I was going to talk about this.
Yeah, Hamilton and John Adams were discussing this big issue with banking and central power and going into debt and running, all this kind of stuff. And it ended fantastically by John Adams saying, "Oh, I don't dispute your patriotism,
just your sanity."
Yeah, that makes sense.
And that's actually what I wanted to kind of recommend, is that there's another, there's this other interesting series that you can watch called John Adams. And is it on Showtime, or I can't remember?
I think it's HBO.
Oh, it is HBO?
Yeah.
So that I thought I had watched that on Netflix way back in the day, but maybe I didn't.
Yeah, you did.
There was a while, I believe it was on Prime.
It was on Netflix
or something like that.
Oh, okay.
Or something,
well, it came out around 2010, 2011, and it's really good.
It is.
It's really entertaining. Paul Giamatti, I think, plays.
I learned a lot
John
from that series, actually, and I thought it was absolutely wonderful. And it's great because you saw a man go from staunch, what we would call libertarian principles in shirking a tyrant, then mold his way through power to become almost a central power guy, where you get the Federalists and the Whigs and all those people, starting to fight at that point. And really fascinating whenever you start to realize that power, even those who we might quote unquote idolize in the founding of our country, still ultimately corrupted.
Yeah. And I think that's really the lesson, is that there's a lot to enjoy out of the life of Hamilton, as it's talked about in the musical, but he's definitely no saint. And it's good to learn the straight up history as well. It's really good. Incidentally, fun fact, in John Adams, the guy who plays Alexander Hamilton is also the guy who plays John Smith in The Man in the High Castle, which is an alternate history series on Amazon Prime, where Germany wins World War II.
And he plays
John Smith,
a Nazi.
Yes, John Smith is a Nazi in New York who eventually becomes the Führer. So
that's where I learned the phrase.
I was wondering where you were. Yeah, Obergruppenführer. Yeah, I was
Obergruppenführer Smith.
Yes.
Now, I will say though, don't watch the series. The season 4 is so bad, it's not even worth watching the first 3. But
really
I was wondering where you were going with John Adams Hamilton to Man in the High Castle.
I know, right?
It's like, what the heck? It
all comes back to Nazis.
And
this guy.
Nazis and commies.
All comes back to Nazis, and that's where we end the show.
All right.